There's a phrase that circulates in every recovery community, repeated so often it starts to feel like scripture. Set the boundary, explain the boundary, warn them what happens if the boundary gets crossed. And for years, that advice helped people. It gave structure to something that used to feel chaotic and confusing. But here's what nobody tells you about that advice once you've dealt with a real manipulator, someone who doesn't just occasionally cross lines, but studies them, tests them, and treats every warning you give as intelligence to be used against you later. Warnings don't work on manipulators. Confrontation doesn't work on manipulators. Because both of those things require the other person to have a conscience capable of being appealed to, a sense of fairness that responds to being told, "This hurts me, please stop." Manipulators don't lack the ability to understand that. They lack the will to care. And the moment you understand that distinction, everything about how you protect yourself has to change. So today isn't about boundaries in the traditional sense. It's about something most people never learn because it sounds almost too quiet, too undramatic to be powerful. It's about outplaying, not through confrontation, not through warnings, not through dramatic final conversations that manipulators will simply use as material for their next move. It's about 7 rules that let you win without ever announcing you're playing. Let's start with the first one because it undoes almost everything you were taught about how conflict is supposed to work. Rule 1. Stop giving previews. Every time you tell a manipulator what you're about to do, "If this happens again, I'm leaving. I'm not going to tolerate this much longer. I'm getting close to my limit." You're handing them a rehearsal script. You're giving them exactly the information they need to recalibrate their behavior just enough to keep you hooked without ever actually changing the underlying pattern that's hurting you. This is one of the cruelest ironies of dealing with a manipulator. Your honesty becomes their strategy. Every warning you give in good faith gets filed away and used, consciously or not, to fine-tune exactly how far they can push before you'll actually follow through. And because most people give the same warning multiple times before finally acting on it, manipulators learn something devastating: that your warnings are negotiable, that the line keeps moving, that words are rarely backed by immediate consequence. The people who actually outplay manipulators stop giving previews entirely. They don't announce decisions in advance. They don't narrate their internal process. They simply notice privately when something crosses a real line, and then they act, without a trailer for the movie that's already playing. This isn't cruelty. This is simply refusing to hand someone the blueprint for how to keep manipulating you more precisely. Rule 2. Let them underestimate you. Manipulators build their entire strategy around a specific read they take of you early on. How much you'll tolerate, how quickly you forgive, how desperately you want to be liked or understood. And once they've built that profile, they operate from it, often for years, rarely updating it even as you quietly change underneath the surface. This underestimation is not something you need to correct. In fact, it's one of your greatest advantages. The moment you announce your growth, "I'm not the same person I used to be. I've been working on myself. I won't be manipulated the way I was before." You give them a reason to sharpen their approach, to study you more carefully, to adjust their tactics to account for the new information you just handed them for free. People who successfully outplay manipulators let the underestimation continue as long as it's useful. They let the manipulator believe they still have the same leverage they always had, right up until the moment that belief no longer matters, because a decision has already been made, a boundary has already been enforced, an exit has already been executed, all without the manipulator ever seeing it coming clearly enough to intervene. Rule 3. Stop needing them to understand. This is one of the hardest shifts for genuinely empathetic people, because so much of your instinct is built around mutual understanding as the foundation of resolution. You want them to see your perspective. You want them to acknowledge the pain they caused. You want, on some deep level, for the story to end with them finally getting it. Manipulators rarely get it, and chasing that understanding, waiting for it before you allow yourself to move forward, keeps you tethered to someone who has absolutely no incentive to ever provide it. Every ounce of energy spent trying to make a manipulator understand your pain is energy diverted away from the only thing that actually matters: your own protection, your own peace, your own next move. Outplaying a manipulator means releasing the requirement of their comprehension entirely. You don't need them to agree with your decision. You don't need them to validate your reasoning. You simply need your own clarity, which exists independently of whether they'll ever share it. Rule 4. Make your exit boring. Manipulators feed on drama. A loud, emotional ending gives them exactly what they want: a final performance where they can play victim, twist the narrative, generate sympathy from anyone watching, and cast you as the unreasonable one who blew everything up unnecessarily. The people who truly outplay manipulators understand this, and they deny them that stage entirely. No dramatic final speech, no cathartic confrontation, no emotional scene that gives the manipulator fresh material to work with for months afterward. Just a quiet, almost anticlimactic exit, one that leaves nothing behind for them to spin into a story where they come out looking sympathetic. Boring is the opposite of what a manipulator wants, and that's exactly why it works. Rule 5. Control the timeline, not the reaction. Most people, when dealing with a manipulator, spend enormous amounts of energy trying to control how the manipulator reacts, hoping for remorse, hoping for change, hoping the confrontation lands the way it's supposed to in their imagination. But you cannot control someone else's reaction. You never could. What you can control is the timeline. When you speak, when you act, when you exit, when you stop responding entirely. This distinction changes everything about how you approach a manipulator. Instead of asking, "How do I get them to finally understand what they did?" you start asking, "When is the right moment for me to act, regardless of whether they ever understand anything at all?" This reframe removes an enormous amount of wasted energy because it stops tying your next move to something entirely outside your control, someone else's internal state, and ties it instead to something you actually have power over: your own timing. People who successfully outplay manipulators often move at moments that seem, from the outside, almost random. Not during the worst fight, not in the heat of the most recent betrayal. Sometimes weeks or even months after the incident that actually broke something inside them, once the plan is fully formed, once the exit is fully prepared, once there's no chance of being talked out of it in a moment of emotional exhaustion. This drives manipulators to a specific kind of desperation because they're used to reading emotional peaks and troughs, used to knowing exactly when someone is vulnerable enough to be pulled back in. When you move on your own timeline instead of theirs, when your actions are no longer predictable responses to their provocations, you become someone whose behavior can no longer be reverse engineered and exploited. Rule 6. Withhold the full picture until it doesn't matter anymore. Manipulators are skilled at damage control precisely because they usually get advance warning that damage control might be necessary. A partial confession here, a hint of frustration there, a warning shot fired too early. All of it gives them time to prepare, to preempt, to construct a counter-narrative before you've even finished putting your own thoughts together. The people who outplay manipulators most effectively understand something crucial. Information is leverage, and leverage should never be handed over before it's needed. This doesn't mean lying or being deceptive in some malicious sense. It means simply not narrating every internal realization out loud the moment it occurs. It means processing your own clarity privately, allowing your understanding of the pattern to fully form before ever revealing how much you've actually seen. By the time a manipulator realizes the full extent of what you understand about them, the pattern you've tracked, the inconsistencies you've noticed, the manipulation you've quietly cataloged over months or years, it's often already too late for them to do anything about it. There's no opportunity for damage control, because the damage isn't being revealed in real time. It's being revealed as a completed picture, all at once, at a moment of your own choosing, when their ability to spin it into something more sympathetic has already been eliminated. Rule 7. Never let them see what actually hurts you. This might be the single most important rule of all, because it's the one manipulators rely on most heavily throughout every stage of a relationship. Manipulators build their entire playbook around your vulnerabilities, the things that genuinely hurt you, the insecurities you've shared in your most trusting moments, the wounds that go deepest and take longest to heal. Every time you visibly react to those things, every time your face, your voice, your body language reveals exactly how much a particular comment or tactic actually landed, you're handing over priceless intelligence. You're confirming, in real time, exactly where your softest, most exploitable places are located, which means that specific tactic will very likely return, refined and sharpened, the next time they need something from you. People who successfully outplay manipulators learn to protect this information as fiercely as they'd protect any other valuable resource. This doesn't mean suppressing your feelings entirely or pretending nothing ever hurts in some unhealthy, dissociated way. It means simply not performing your pain for an audience who will only use it against you later. You can feel the hurt fully, privately, and process it with people who have actually earned access to your vulnerability, while giving the manipulator nothing but calm, unreadable neutrality in the moments when they're actively testing for a reaction. This single shift, more than almost any other, is what ultimately disarms a manipulator completely, because without access to your genuine reactions, they lose the map they've always relied on to navigate you. And a manipulator without a map isn't dangerous anymore. He's just lost. And once you've mastered all 7 of these rules, not as isolated tactics, but as an integrated way of moving through relationships with people who cannot be trusted with the truth of your inner world, something shifts that goes far beyond simply protecting yourself from one specific manipulator. You become someone manipulators can no longer identify as a target in the first place. Because here's what almost nobody explains about these 7 rules until you've lived them long enough to see the pattern clearly. They don't just protect you from the manipulator currently in your life. They fundamentally change your nervous system, your instincts, your default way of moving through the world in a way that makes you almost invisible to manipulation before it even has the chance to begin. Think about what manipulators are actually searching for when they scan a room, a workplace, a family gathering, a first date. They're not looking for weakness in the way people usually imagine it. They're looking for reactivity, predictability, someone whose emotional responses can be mapped quickly, whose boundaries shift under pressure, whose need for understanding or approval creates an opening wide enough to exploit. Someone who has genuinely internalized these 7 rules simply doesn't offer that opening anymore, not because she's become cold or unreachable, but because her reactions are no longer available for public consumption the moment someone tests for them. Her timeline is her own. Her vulnerabilities are reserved for people who've actually earned them. Her decisions are made quietly, deliberately, without previews or warnings that could be studied and circumvented. And this is where something remarkable happens, something that goes beyond simply surviving one manipulator and extends into an entirely different quality of life. Because manipulators, without consciously articulating it, develop an almost instinctive sense for who is and isn't worth the investment of their tactics. They can feel within moments whether someone offers the reactivity they need to operate effectively. And when they encounter someone who doesn't, someone whose calm isn't performance, whose boundaries aren't up for negotiation, whose inner world remains genuinely private no matter how skillfully they probe for access, they simply move on. This isn't a dramatic rejection. It's not a confrontation where you finally prove your strength and watch them slink away defeated. It's quieter than that, and in some ways, more satisfying, because it means you never even have to fight the battle in the first place. You become someone they filter out automatically, someone their instincts warn them away from before any real investment has been made, someone who simply doesn't register on their radar as worth the effort required to manipulate. This is the ultimate outcome of learning to outplay rather than confront or warn. It's not about winning individual battles against individual manipulators, satisfying as those small victories can sometimes feel. It's about becoming a fundamentally different kind of person to encounter. someone whose entire presence signals, without a single word being spoken, that the usual tactics simply won't work here. And here's what makes this especially powerful for anyone who spent years being an easy target, who gave manipulators exactly the reactivity, the previews, the vulnerable openness they were looking for, without ever understanding why the same painful pattern kept repeating with different people wearing the same tactics. None of that was a permanent character flaw. It was simply the result of operating according to rules that only work on people with a conscience: honesty, warning, direct confrontation, mutual understanding, applied to people who have no conscience to appeal to in the first place. Learning these 7 rules doesn't require becoming someone dishonest, cold, or manipulative yourself. It requires something far more sophisticated: the wisdom to recognize when you're dealing with someone who will only use your usual playbook against you, and the discipline to switch strategies accordingly without ever losing your own integrity in the process. Because here's the final truth underlying everything we've discussed today. Outplaying a manipulator was never about becoming someone crueler or more calculated than they are. It was about becoming someone quieter, steadier, and infinitely harder to read than the games they've spent a lifetime perfecting. It was about realizing that you don't owe anyone a preview of your next move, an explanation for your boundaries, or access to the parts of yourself that took years of pain to finally learn how to protect. The manipulators who once ran entire relationships according to their own rules eventually meet someone who simply stopped playing by them. Someone who stopped announcing, stopped warning, stopped waiting for understanding that was never going to come. Someone who just quietly, completely outplayed them instead. And by the time they realize what happened, there's nothing left to say, nothing left to manipulate, nothing left to control. There's just you. Finally, completely unreachable.